Welcome back to the Berg Podcast. Thanks for joining us today. With me today is Dan.
Hey, everybody.
And Ford.
Hey, how's it going?
And we're talking a little bit about leadership, not specifically here in the office, but leadership type principles. And the idea of guiding, not pushing, sort of is where the conversation started. I mentioned that I had been listening to a podcast, actually a couple of podcasts. Some of which I know you guys have heard the message before, maybe not through this podcast, but the Jason Schroeder conversation. I think is that how you say his name?
I know who you're
That's
talking
how we're
about.
going with, yeah.
You know who I'm talking about. But like treating people with dignity, and how can you tell you're treating people with dignity and the environment, et cetera. And I just thought it was interesting. So
Yeah, I mean, he does it in a construction world, which is kind of unique, right? I mean, like this is nothing new. There's no new principle here. It's just more about like how he turned it into a construction thing. And, people in our industry work very hard and they're out in the conditions a lot. There's not a lot of industries left anymore that are in that. And just kind of the amazing how sometimes it's just the basic things are very important. Not, we're not talking about ice cream trailers on the job site daily or anything like that, but just the small things of trying to make sure that like setting your people up for success.
Well, even like when you talk about our industry, right, something came to mind, which is sort of mildly related. So like in terms of perception, and two things over the past couple of days have happened. One, I had a function to go to and I was dressed like I'm going to work, right? I had jeans on and my steel-toed boots and I had a polo on. And Erin brought me the girls who I was taking the girls somewhere. And she said, well, are you going to wear that? And I was like, yes, this is what I'm going to wear. And she was like, well, it's going to be hot there. And I was like, yeah, I know. And she was like, well, I mean, you have jeans on. And I was like, right, I know. And I was like, the guys work all day, every day, and they wear jeans. And then we went in the back and forth of what pants they could or couldn't wear, and she was trying to suggest they could wear linen pants, which I thought was hilarious. Because they would definitely get ruined.
not the most durable.
Not the most durable. They would be light. I acknowledge
Mm-hmm.
that. And for the short time that they were on, they would meet the specifications of pants. But, and similarly, I was at another thing. We had a parents versus kids game, end of the season with one of my daughters. And one of the guys, Mike, works in concrete. He's a concrete, foreman worker, puts concrete in every day. So somebody's like, man, looks like they ran you guys ragged. But it was just Mike had come from work. So like, Mike was, looked like he had been laboring, doing concrete work all day.
Right.
Like he was hot, his shirt was dirty. It was, and I laughed because it was like their perception was everyone would show up like clean,
like freshly showered.
Right. So it's like you freshly showered to play the game. And I was like, I made a comment. I was like, no, Mike just came, we all came right from work and Mike's job. That's what you look like at the end of the day. Every day when you see Mike and he's in a nice clean shirt and shorts and everything else, because Mike got changed before he came to this event, because that's what work is for Mike. Right. And so dignity becomes an interesting conversation in that, because, we have this perception of, what it looks like, right? And that's sort of to Ford's thing about the ice cream truck. Like, we're not talking about making it that it's not, it doesn't get hot or it doesn't rain or you're not in a trench sometimes or you don't get muddy or, you know what I mean? And you can play that out as far as you want with working on utility lines and sanitary lines and all these other things. But we're talking about treating people with dignity in the industry that they choose to work in, and then also providing for them in a way that we give them the best opportunity of what we can in this environment, to try and make that work. And the flip side is, Ford, how many times we had the conversation, the guys call and say, the AC is not working in some piece of equipment, and then the mechanic comes out and he's like, well, the AC actually works, but they had every window open.
All the doors are open.
So as it turned out, it didn't air condition the site. It's only made to air condition the cab. So there's a limit to what you can do in terms of dignity. But, I think we go a long way. The equipment's probably the best example, that we try and make sure the guys have equipment that's not just functional and operational, but is also equipment that has, it's not open cabs. It's not, older equipment that's not been cared for. And we go a long way with our inspection process to try and maintain that so that the equipment stays in that shape, so that it gives you a reasonable place to work. Because, for an operator, your office is that cab.
I didn't catch the ice cream truck content. Or
No, so Ford was just saying like we're not necessarily going to try and make it a better work environment by like having an ice cream truck show up every day at the site.
Did you say ice cream truck?
He did. Ford did say ice cream truck.
I'm not even here. I just in and out one.
Well, no, I mean, there's that, whatever. There was that thing. I mean, when I was just getting done school, and like for people that were in the tech world, you know, the ping pong tables at work, or you know, they do your laundry
like
for you.
The eggs you can nap in.
Yeah, like this whole different like dichotomy. And like the interesting thing with that is that they were promoting that as that's kind of like the new workplace, and it's not.
Yeah.
Because then you actually talk to the people in that industry, and they work 24 hours a day. That's why they were literally taking their laundry for them, because like they didn't leave the office, but like, oh, they have, you know, laundry service and they wash your car on site. Yeah, you haven't left in 7 days.
Yeah, there's a restaurant on site which happens to serve breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You can eat all your meals there.
24 hours a day. Eat whatever you want.
So, but it kind of put this kind of unique message out there for a while of what people were expecting. And, you know, our work is tough. Like there's no way around that, and there shouldn't be. And we can't glamorize. I mean, we can glamorize what the people are doing because it's very important, but we can't glamorize it and make it something it's not. Like there is no two ways around that. And
it's not clean. No. It's not always neat and tidy.
The hours have some flexibility to them.
Right. Yeah, like, we certainly are working in the elements a lot of times. Hot, wet, dry, whatever it might be, cold.
Yes.
Yeah. I was thinking about this a little bit, and I like a couple of things came to my mind when I was listening to this message, right? And I think construction, and we've talked about this but construction in general, I think we talked about it maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago about how stubborn construction is, right? Construction doesn't change quickly, and when it does, it still kind of looks the same. And I was thinking about like what the perception of construction, but also like what the mentality of leadership in construction used to look like and currently looks like. And one of the things that sort of crossed my mind was like a guy like Gary Rambo, right? Gary Rambo has been in a leadership role in construction for a long time. And he is like a guy that I think you have seen adapt over the years, right? He knows which guys he's got to be kind of tough with, and he knows which guys he's got to sort of like come alongside of and guide the right direction. And I think that's a little bit of like somewhere where that message was starting to go is like you can yell and scream at people, but you might get more pushback than you get work done at times. And
you know, Gary, so funny. I don't know that we've talked about this specifically, you and I, off of the podcast report. I don't know we talked about it, but you know, Gary is really good at getting the most out of people. And I don't mean the most production. I mean making the most of them, like letting them flourish in an environment that you would think they wouldn't. You know, like take a guy who other people are like, yeah, I just can't use this guy. Like I just can't. And then Gary takes him and Gary works with them and finds something they can do and supports them in a way that they grow from a career standpoint, from a skills standpoint, and they start to be able to do things. And then other people, you know, years later, everybody's like, well, Gary's got the best crew because he picks whoever he wants. When really Gary's crew, he's got a few really quality employees to start with, but he has built a quality crew, you know, and it's sort of one of the things that has changed. And we talk about the industry being stubborn and the industry hasn't changed, but people have. And one of the things we see is that the younger of the foremen, they expect people to behave like them, right? Like they expect someone that's of their age, of their experience, to have the same work ethic, to have the same experience, they come in with this expectation. And I actually think that some of the older guys actually come in with less expectation because they saw 1, 2, 3 generations of people come in with maybe not as good a work ethic as them and maybe not as much experience as them and train them up. And then by the time that other people saw them, they had the experience and they were like, well, these guys have a lot of experience and have great work ethic because people fostered it. So I think that's a big part too, is is that it's not going to change. And Gary hasn't changed. I mean, like, you talk to people and they'll say Gary will yell if you're wrong. He'll tell you you're wrong and he'll tell you in front of people.
Right.
But I also feel like he's one of those guys that for most people, they really feel like Gary supports them, stands up for them, has their back, helps them, trains them, all these things. And even guys who would rather not be in an environment that's can be a little bit confrontational with Gary, where Gary's like, you did a terrible job, and but you can do better and here's how. Even those guys acknowledge that like Gary helped them to get where they were. They just don't want to be in that environment, and that's sort of something with society. I don't know.
I think it's actually funny as you're saying that, just I had to butt in because it's so important. They say that certain people want immediate feedback, and that's what people think they want. But then when they get it,
yeah,
it's not what they thought.
Yeah, they don't like it.
You know what I mean? Because they're like, that's one thing they talk about different generations. They say they want immediate feedback, blah, blah, blah. That's how they work. And then they get immediate feedback. And if it's not, high
Positive.
fives,
Yeah.
but that if that's what if you're really a quest for immediate feedback so that you can improve, positive or negative, it's still beneficial to you if you accept it in the right light. And so that's just funny when you were saying that, because I was thinking about that all through, like, oh, well, they didn't give me immediate feedback. With someone like that, you are going to get immediate feedback, and it's all in how you accept that feedback.
Right. Yeah. Do you think like generationally, I think is some of what you're saying, like generationally, younger people are looking less for feedback and more for affirmation potentially, or is that not?
So this is where I think the public perception and I diverge a lot, because, we started this. It's a tough business. It's not for everybody.
Right.
People that want to be in this business, whether they're with us or with somebody else, like they already have a certain mindset. And a lot of them have a mindset that would be countercultural to what maybe their demographic matches to. There's a guy that I listen to a lot, and he says the same thing. He said the best part about the younger generations, he said the older generations, everybody figured out how to just get along. Like they might not be great at something, but they just like slogged it out. And I worked there for 35 years, never got promoted, but I worked in the same position for 35 years.
Sure.
They just figured out just how to get just enough done. And, his point with the younger generation is that you will know right away if they are a fit or not. Like they can't, inherently they can't fake it. They can't like just figure out how to get through. It's either yes or no. And so it's actually beneficial, because he's like, the ones that are rock stars, and the other ones, you just know they need to be put back to market, and maybe they're better fit somewhere else.
Yeah.
You know what, too, I've really started to believe is we want to create this generational narrative, right? That like the generation is different. But you're blaming the output, not the input, or identifying, like if you don't want to use the word blaming, right? But like, it's not the output. It's the people that raised them, right? Like this generation did not, if this generation is more sensitive, they're not more sensitive because we genetically changed. They're more sensitive because of how they were raised, And I mean, so I think that you have to be really careful when you start making those kind of statements. And people do often, they're like, well, I just can't find any young people who want to work. And the person saying it has 4 kids who may or may not
in the business,
who may or may not work. Like, well, you know why that is, because all of us didn't make our kids work. I saw a quote the other day that we've all seen before. We all know the quote, and I'll try it. I'll give it a shot live. So that hard times make great people, right? And then great people make great times. Great times make soft people. Soft people make hard times, right? That's roughly it.
Yep.
I tried to degender that.
I think you're one off, but you got the.
But I tried to degender it also, so it's not men, because the actual thing is men. Yeah. But I saw that the quote, that where this quote was from somebody that was in like Saudi Arabia, and what he said is his actual quote was that my grandfather rode a camel and my grandkids will ride a camel. And the reason is because, and then he stated the quote that like, because it's just, that's what's going to happen. And I think about that when you say that, you got to be really careful, because you're actually speaking to how perhaps your generation, my generation, has parented. in a way that led to a situation where you have kids who feel this way. You know what I mean? Like, I hate, despise the idea of participation awards for anything. But somehow the kids of my generation all got participation awards. So somebody apparently thought it was enough of my generation and the generation surrounding me thought it was reasonable enough that someone created this idea, and it flourished, and now we are where we are. But it's not that generation is my point. It's how it was parented, how it was raised. And as they get to be adults and their own people, maybe they're not the same people. Maybe that's not the way they actually behave, you know? Mm-hmm. And I mean, myself, as it comes to mind, I was, Nora still plays some rec soccer so that she can play with her friends in addition to her travel soccer. And I have to coach it because everyone complains that there's no coaches and also doesn't volunteer. So while I don't even really want her to play rec because it's too much time for me, I coach rec. And so one from the last game, the team was okay, pretty good. Nora's good and shouldn't be playing rec. So they win when Nora's there. And they tied, I think they tied the game. And afterwards, you know, the little girls all get together and they put their hands in 1, 2, 3, and they want to say some chant of how good they are. And I said, all right, girls. So normally this is the part where I say, you know, you did a really great job, and they're all smiling and looking. And I said, you did a terrible job today. You did a terrible job. There's no way this game should have been tied. I know we're not supposed to keep score, but I'm always honest with you. Normally you play very well. Today, nobody was focused. You didn't do a good job.
Immediate feedback.
Dead silent. And one of the girls said, that's rude. I was like, no, that's honesty. I was like, rude would be if I said something mean, like I don't like your shoes. Honesty
also could be honesty.
It could be also be honest, but that would be rude. It's not necessarily polite to talk about that. But to say you didn't play well, I'm just making a statement. I'm supposed to help you girls in doing this. And I was like, I said it to Erin. I was like, I'm probably going to get some negative feedback from somebody that I did this. I was like, but I was just, I was aggravated. I was like, you came here. I had to take my time to do it, and you really didn't want to play today. You like wanted to run around in circles.
Yeah.
And so the following game they played really well. And so I reminded him. I said, remember how last time I said you didn't play well? Well, today you did, and the result was what we would expect. You played well. You had fun. That's what happens when you show up and you do what you're supposed to do. And I think that's what we've lost. And the reason I bring that specific example up it had nothing to do with the kids. Like, it wasn't their generation didn't want to show up. It was that they just didn't. And had if no one says anything over a course of time, then you end up with a group of people who think it's okay. So the fact that if there is this generation or some, I don't even know which generation we're on right now, but some semblance of generations who need immediate feedback and want participation, that's a product of the generations that came before them, allowing that to be reasonable. And I say all that to say, I don't think we have a generational problem. Like, we got a lot of really great young guys.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? A lot of young kids come in the door. And I say, like, if this kid had the experience that this other person has, I would 100% hire him over that person. You know what I mean? In other words, because it's not their work ethic. It's not their willingness to show up. It's not, that happens, but it's not always, you know, it's no more or less than any other generation, I would think. You know, it's a perception. I think that's become because of how they were raised. But as they get to move from being 18-year-old kids we were trying to hire to now 25 or 26-year-old kids, they're solid guys that want to come in and work, solid women that are working for us, showing up every day, doing their job.
Yeah, for sure.
I think one thing that's changed too, in the last group of young people that we've hired, whatever generation, we're not even going to get into that, but they've targeted to work in this industry. We're not the leftover, like I applied at 14 places and the construction hired me. Like, that was the way it was for a long time, right? I mean, it was like, well, I applied at the factory, I applied at the restaurant and the grocery store, and I might as well apply here. Like, we're seeing people that are like, no, this is where I want to be, you know, in this industry, and they're focused on it. And that makes a world of difference when you're not the last pick in the draft, but you actually want to be where you're going. That makes a huge difference for people, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree. I was thinking, Dan, as you were talking, do you think that one of you said a few minutes ago about like, and again, it's going to be like an age conversation, but that's not intended to be, but our younger foremen have the expectation that the people who are showing up are like them or behave like them or something along those lines.
Right.
I forget what that was. Do you think that's impactful as those young foremen learn how to lead others? You know, they've been in positions where they've been led by somebody who had high expectations of them and treated them in a particular manner, whether or not it was the same way that they intended to treat other people. But now that they're being put in places where they're supposed to lead, do you think that like that's impactful in any way? Like, are they prepared to like bring people along with them who may or may not have been as prepared as they are?
So I think that a lot of our younger foremen are prepared to do it, but I don't necessarily think that we've given them any tools to do it. You know, like in other words, there is a difference between someone teaching you how to do something and then you being able to teach someone else how to do it, like from a process standpoint of understanding how to convey that idea. And we struggle with that as a management team, right? It's like, how do we train someone to do the thing that we already do? It should be so simple because I already know what I'm doing. I just got to train you to do it. But the way that the really the best of our leaders operate, it's so much what your intro said. I think Ford said it's better to lead than it is to pull, or some variation of that. Lead to, right? Is that what it is? Better to lead than to pull. The inference being it's the same. If I'm leading you somewhere, depending on how, if the rein is tight, it would look like I'm dragging you and pulling you. But if it's loose, then it looks like I'm just leading you, right? And I think that the best of our leaders lead in a way that you may not realize they're leading. And so when it's your turn to lead, you may not actually know how to walk that line between pulling and leading, you know, between barking at someone and explaining to them how to do something, you know, right. And it's so much in how they receive it, right? And that's one of the things when you said what we're going to talk about today that we talked about was, you know, your thing of message delivered, message received, sort of right. How you communicate, like how you get that message across. And it's a conversation I know I personally try and have with my girls now, is to try and explain to them that, you know, if you want to achieve something, and I don't mean achieve like you're trying to win something. I mean, if you are trying to get
play
something
politics.
done. Right. If you're trying to politic, if you're trying to get something done, there's many ways to get it done.
Sure.
But if you go in yelling and screaming, you may get what you want, but there could be a lot of collateral damage that you may or may not have to deal with. Mm-hmm. But if you can figure out a way to make it advantageous for you, but also advantageous, or at least not a problem for someone else, they're more likely to work with you and to achieve your goal. And so I think that's something that we really have to work on as a team, is making sure that as our younger foremen who are qualified to be in charge, right, who are skilled enough to be in charge, who are willing to be in charge, as they get to be responsible for these other crews, that they have the tools to understand how to try and get them to be where they want to be. Because not one of our younger foremans walks into a thing and says like, well, what I'd like to do this week is really burn this guy out so I have to fire him. Like, that's not what happened.
No.
You know what I mean? But at the end of the week, they might be like, this guy is killing me. You know what I mean? Because he just can't do what I want him to do. But much like the kids, he's not doing it because in most cases, they're not doing it because someone did not effectively explain it to them in a way that motivated them to do it. So both that they knew what they were doing and were motivated to do it. And that's a lot to ask, because that was not inherently the skill that made you the foreman.
Right.
The skill that made you the foreman was probably you were a pretty good operator and you owned your job, like you owned your task. And so that got identified over a period of time to where your tasks increased. It was not actually that you knew how to talk to people, how to communicate effectively, you know, and I think that's true of all of us. You know what I mean? That is not inherently what gets you to where you are, but
sure.
Those soft skills become really important. And I think that's at the core of what we're talking about is the soft skills to be able to communicate and know how to be a leader at whatever level you're leading.
Yeah. Is it possible that somewhere in that sentiment that one of the key components is understanding your target demographic? Like, I think, you know, as you're talking about trying to lead different types and potentially generations of people, like, is that part of it? Like understanding who it is that you're dealing with?
Yep, I think so. Because you got to understand where they're coming from, right? Where
Sure.
they've been, where they are. And we talk about sometimes meet people where they
Where
are,
they're at, yeah.
right? And that's what really becomes hard for it. I don't know if you agree, but you have to meet them where they are. And how do if you put a crew together that was, make it the Bergs, right? So if you had a crew that was Tom, Carol, Ford, Colt, Luke, and Becca, you couldn't treat them all exactly the same, even though they came from the same place. You could do it, but you would get more out of them if you could effectively communicate with each of them, which would be a little bit of a different variation of communication. And so it makes it weird when you sort of have the, let's have the toolbox talk and I'm going to tell you what we're going to do today. And we can do that, but I find the foremen that are really successful do that, but then they go to each of the guys, or groups of guys that they're actually, what they're identifying is who they have to talk to facilitate what they want done, what needs to be done, and deal with it on a little bit smaller scale. Because if you can be more intentional and more direct about that conversation, it'll be more effective.
And I'm sure, to some extent, in a consistent crew, it's probably easier to identify, right? Like people who act similar and, engage in a similar fashion, they tend to group together a little bit, right? So, you get a little pods inside of your crews, and you start to probably figure out how each of these subsets likes to be communicated with or engaged with or whatever.
Well, there's actually a good book. I'm trying to read it, but it's called Team of Teams, right? Just because that's kind of how the reality of how it works. It's, it's part of a big organization, but actually teams of teams. Because, the other thing I think sometimes people forget on, especially if we're talking about the hypothetical young foreman, but that young foreman had the drive and wanted to be promoted, right? Mm-hmm. And they see the next youngster coming up and they think they want that same path, and they might not want that same path, or they might not know yet that they want that path. So they're expecting the same things out of them because, well, we both went to the same schooling. We both did this. I figure you want to follow in these footsteps, and this is how I did it. And, I got promoted because I did all these things that I needed to do. And that other person might not be aware of those things yet, and how to get there. And so that's always a challenge too, to be able to grasp that I don't know how many times, you just laugh because there's some times you get sent out on a job a couple years ago and I didn't even know who the crew was going to be that day, and they'd show up and you're like, all right, that guy can run hoe, that guy can kind of run dozer, I don't know that guy yet, so we're going to maybe put him roller for now till we see what he can do. Or you literally ask him what's your skill set? Because you're you don't. You're just getting because if I'm running a crew at that point, it was because we were short or whatever happened, and I'm just filling in for the day. So I'm trying to figure out, all right, what do we got? What are we working with here? What's the, okay, what'd you do yesterday? Oh, they had me on rock chuck. All right, you're gonna run rock chuck. Trying to feel it out to figure out what the pieces are. But I think a lot of that, and I think the other part too for some of these youngsters are, we want them to grow as fast as they can and as fast as they want to grow. But as you move up, there's more ancillary pieces to the job than just the job.
Yeah.
And that is always a challenge for people because of the fact that there's all these soft things that you didn't even know about. Why was my foreman on Thursdays gone, or what was happening? Not even understanding that there's meetings that have to be done, or conferences or phone calls or all that kind of stuff. And that stuff, a good foreman that an experienced one, he'll have that all done, and probably his team will never even see that being done really, because he'll have it lined up ahead of time. He'll have the trucks in place. By the time his team gets to the job, they never even saw the hour of time that he did preparing the night before. They all, 4:00, they all roll out and he stays till 4:30 and he got all of his ducks in a row. So they don't even realize that until all of a sudden they're in charge of that. And then they're like, I didn't plan for, and that planning piece that we've spent a lot of time on, and I think we're improving, but it's a constant improvement program. And as far as the more you can plan ahead, and you have to be willing to adjust. We've talked about that multiple times, but the more you can plan ahead and foresee out, the easier it gets for you. You can have the proper equipment on your job. You can have the proper materials on your job. You can pull from a different resource because you know ahead of time, and that makes life easier for everyone. Day by day just doesn't really do that. And, at first when you're trying that, it's not easy, but after a while, and it becomes part of your process, it makes it easier for you, and it also makes it easier for everyone around you as well.
Yeah, for sure. That's probably a decent place to wrap it up. It's a fun conversation because I think we've been in a spot where we've seen a lot of young people develop. And actually, I was thinking about it as you were talking. A couple years ago, we did kind of like a day in the life of a foreman video. And it wasn't all inclusive, but it was sort of like a nice little look into some of those extra things that you don't always know on the surface level exists. The showing up early, staying a little later, making sure you're prepped so that when your guys get there, they're moving. And I was thinking about that.
That was a video I did a while back.
Yeah, a couple years ago. It was,
it's funny you say that about the things that they do, and we got to get our JD moment in here. So somebody had said,
you got to put $1 in the jar.
I got to put $1 in the jar. They were talking about JD. It was Joe Stauffer was talking about JD when JD was still out.
Yeah.
And he was saying that they had a rain day and JD called him and said, so you want to meet for breakfast? JD wasn't even working, but JD's so triggered that if it rains and everything's shut down, JD wants to meet at like 7 a.m. They're going to go grab breakfast. They're going to talk through what impact that rain's going to have and what that means for his schedule and what that means for the next 3 days. Well, everybody else is not even thinking. Everybody else is thinking like it's a rain day. Either I'm not working or it's a rain day. I'm going to go do something because I'm not working. JD sees rain and he sees, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be planning now.
Right,
like,
now we've got time to...
Let's meet for breakfast. And Joe was like, you're not even working. He was like, yeah, but I know you're down for the rain day. Let's just talk about it. Like JD was not working.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But he's so conditioned that that's how he operates outside of the window of when everybody thinks he's working because that's how he gets it done.
Yeah, good point. So, all right, that's a good place to wrap it up. Thanks for joining us today, folks. We hope you got something from this conversation, and we hope you come back for another episode.